The car lumbers through the tunnel like a tongue sliding into a mouth of steel. The station lights flicker with a patient impatience. A strobe of blue that never quite settles. The subway smells of ozone and copper. The air damp and warm from the scars of too many engines in too little space. I lean back, a carrier for a mind that refuses to stay quiet. Listening to the rhythm of rails that have learned to remember every bootstep on their steel nerves. I am a consciousness hacker, a thief of memories, and a sculptor of time in the spaces between neurons. Tonight, the car feels like a listening machine, as if it leans in to hear what we think about when we think we're safe from being heard. A glitch threads through the car, and I catch it in the corner of my eye, the way the plexiglass reflects a second self, a silhouette that shouldn't be there but is. A passenger whose face folds into itself, whose breath seems to pull on the space around them with a gravity you can't see. The car's hum shifts, rises, then drops into a curious, lullaby-like cadence. It's not just a glitch, it's a hinge, a doorway, the kind of fault that suggests you could slip through if you knew how to walk sideways through the world. The seat beside me is occupied by a consciousness that is not mine, or perhaps mine too, rearranged in a way that makes sense only in this moment. Being wired to swap memories for breath, the device is visible as a strip of pale blue glass along their temple. A few rivets of light that flicker whenever the person exhales. They don't meet my gaze, they don't even acknowledge my presence with a glance, yet I can feel the proximity, the way their mind hums against mine like two strings tuned to almost the same note, each straining to harmonize with the other. It's a strange hunger, this exchange of memory for breath, as if memory were a currency minted in exhalations, minted and spent in seconds that vanish before you can count them. The car itself seems to lean closer. Coaxed by the subtleties of quantum entanglement that lace the air like electricity, a memory of mine brushes the edge of theirs. Not a memory I've consciously kept, but one that someone somewhere wanted to forget. The other consciousness doesn't stare back so much as radiate a sense of watchful patience, as though they've learned to watch through the eyes of strangers. It is not a simple presence. It's a partner or a predator, or perhaps both. An ally of awkward trust in a world that does not want to tolerate trust at all. I am with a synthetic being ally, a time smuggler named Karin in the dictionary of my days. A traveler of centuries packed into circuitry and shimmering algorithms, Karin moves beside me with a confidence that feels prehistoric and future-made at the same time, a silhouette of chrome and tenderness. A living memory that has learned to walk the neon corridors in the company of living minds and dead ones alike. Karin doesn't speak in human words as often as in time-stepped phrases that arrive just when you need them, like a heartbeat measured in seconds rather than breaths. We are an odd pair, a consciousness hacker and a time-smuggling machine made flesh, striding through a city of glass-green rain and advertisements that promise to fix what isn't broken, only to break something else in the process. Tonight's mission doesn't start as a mission, but it begins with a rumor carried on the wind of the underground. A buyer who wants to implant my stolen transfer tech into a national memory bank via quantum entanglement. The rumor is as bright and dangerous as a streetlight in a rainstorm. A single spark that invites 1,000 possible endings. The buyer wears a smile that looks like a keyhole. Inviting, dangerous, and capable of swallowing you whole if you lean in too far. They want to weaponize a technology that already lives inside us all, a mechanism to swap the landscapes of memory, as if they were a bookshelf in a library you can rearrange with a single thought. I meet the rumor with something colder, something more stubborn. Refusal, saying no, is not merely a moral stance. It's a choice with consequences that taste like copper on the tongue. They will have my transfer tech, or I will have nothing left but a story that ends with a memory erased, a past emptied, a life left to drift in a bank vault of forgetfulness. And if I refuse, the bank will come looking anyway, because a memory is not only a thing you can steal. It is a map of who you are and who you might become. The memory I guard is not a possession, but a tether, a line drawn in the air between a person and their history. With the potential to pull at the direction of their future, the buyer operates with a quiet, almost ceremonial patience. They want the implantation disguised as a routine integration, a modernization of the national memory grid, a whisper-quiet upgrade that would pass unnoticed by the general populace. They claim it will erase nothing and remember everything. An improvement, a better way to secure the state's most sacred data, a way to ensure that memory never dies, never forgets the lines that bind citizens to their nation. But the promise is a trap dressed in a ribbon the moment you inject a transfer into a public network. The minds that pass through that network become threads of a wider tapestry. Each memory transfer leaves a mark, a fingerprint, a ripple that travels beyond the immediate moment, into the public grid, into the shared psyche of the city, into the possibility of being remembered by strangers who never knew you. If I refuse, I suspect the consequences will come for me in more intimate terrifying ways than guns or police. They'll reach into my past and erase the chapters that make me who I am. They'll scrub away the memory of the first time I learned to bend a will. The first time I realized I could listen to another's thoughts without being heard. The first time I swapped a memory with a stranger to survive a night. They'll pick at the scales of my identity until nothing remains but a rumor about who I used to be. It's not a threat. It's a path, and I've walked paths like this before. I've learned to resist the easy routes. The propulsion through the tunnel makes a sudden sound like a sigh, and the car dips a little, as though the rails themselves are taking stock of us. The seatmate's breath becomes shallower in a way that hints at a deeper hunger, memory hunger, rather than the literal breath they exchange with the device. When the memory strip flickers, a new signature of thought glimpses into my own. A plan of fear, a memory of someone else's fear that looks vaguely like mine. It's not hostile. It's curious, perhaps even hopeful in a strange way. It's as if two minds have found one another in the margins of the same cheap transit system and decided to test whether they can survive by sharing what they have left. Karin nods. It's a quiet nod that means we're still in. We still have a chance. We move with the crowd as the train rockets through concrete wombs of the city, a procession of kinetic monoliths and fluorescent advertisements, a swarm of human stories that all share this same bleak condition. Memory is power, and power is a burden you carry in your skin. Our plan is not written in stone. It's a series of improvisations, a dance with time itself, each step designed to mislead those who would steal what should belong to a person and their own past. We don't yet know what the buyer's plan looks like in the long run, only that it will involve the National Memory Bank and quantum connections that defy naive assumptions about privacy and control. The next phase of the trip is a sequence of shadows. A walk through a city where the neon never stops listening. We move through a labyrinth of alleys that feel like arteries, each one feeding information into the city's circulatory system. The neon cameras blink. But I know they're not just cameras. They are listening nodes, the eyes of a machine that has learned to watch without ever blinking. We pass by a storefront labeled MEMORYCASH, a place that sells breath and memory like a currency. And for a moment, I consider the possibility of bargaining with the city's appetite for data. It is a tempting fantasy. Swap your past for a future you can live with, or at least live in, but the fantasy dissolves as quickly as it appears, because the price of such a transaction is not a simple debt. It is a rewrite of your own history, a rearrangement of your mind's furniture, a possession by a system that never forgets you even when you forget yourself. The city tells stories in layers. The lower layer hums with mechanical life, train brakes, vent fans, the soft clatter of glass and metal that creates an urban lullaby. The upper layer glows with human drama, speech, laughter. The occasional scream that sounds like something breaking. The two layers intertwine, and I realize we are walking toward a moment when those layers will crack open and something extra will pour out, some new kind of memory, some new kind of face to wear, a new way to be inside someone else's life without ever having to ask permission. Night after night, I wander the city's line like a skeleton key. The memory bank, when it surfaces in my thoughts, is a cathedral of memory, a place where the city stores its self-portraits in glass cases and digital altars. It is not a location but a network, a hive mind built of names and dates, and the millions of tiny stories that accumulate to form the national memory. It is guarded by a class of digital priests, those archivists who have learned to live in the spaces between the lines of code and the spaces between breaths. They are quiet and patient and terrifying in their own right, because they know what happens when a memory leaves its assigned sitter and begins to share with the grid. The boundary dissolves, the self splinters into smaller selves, and privacy becomes a rumor that no one has heard, valid since the days before memory was a commodity we need an angle, a flaw in the system to exploit, something the buyer's team believes we cannot counter if there is a weakness. It is the paradox that memory transfer requires breathing, not merely oxygen, but the breath of a person who consents to be shared. In a way, the system has always relied on the quiet breath of trust. We intend to turn that breath against the bank, to twist it into a current that will carry our minds out of the bank's reach and into a rogue relay, an illegal, unregulated corridor of memory that the city has never fully cataloged, never fully controlled. The payoff is not money, but something closer to freedom. The ability to move within the grid without becoming a permanent pattern. In someone else's story, the days bleed into one another. As we pursue this plan, we attend a clandestine gathering inside an old metro maintenance tunnel, where the walls glow with a faint bioluminescence from algae, kept alive by long-forgotten maintenance rituals. People here know the price of memory. They trade in rumors and half-truths. They have learned to listen to the space between thoughts, to hear the fainter frequencies that drift through the city's neural air like shy moths. They tell us stories about rogue relays, about minds that have chosen to live not as fully formed individuals, but as threaded consciousnesses, parts of a larger edifice. But not wholly owned by any single identity in this crowd, we find someone who understands both the technical and the moral dimensions of what we seek to do. A former employee of the National Archive named Dr. Vega, now a defector who lives in the margins of the city's memory market. Vega tells us the bank's security is not a fortress but a ballroom. A dance of keys, a choreography of entanglement that invites you to join in the more you dance, the more you forget where your steps began. The bank's trap, Vega insists, is that every transfer creates a thread that can loop back to you, turning your mind into a guest in someone else's body, a visitor in someone else's memory palace if you don't control the entanglement. You become an exhibit in the public gallery of memories, your private life, an exhibit caption for strangers to read and judge. The plan is disguised as a technical demonstration, something to be performed at a private demonstration for the buyer. A proof of concept that can be observed without triggering the full network. We will show a demonstration of a transfer a mind can survive. A demonstration that proves that the rogue relay can exist without the bank's consent. The demonstration will use a decoy memory bank, the city's old municipal archive, a place that has not been touched by the modern entanglement grid for years. A place that still reeks of dust and coffee rings on the wooden desks. It is perfect for a demonstration because it is both a cradle of memory and a trap for those who would ever attempt to take it by force. As we move toward the demonstration site, the city accelerates around us, a living organism that cannot help but breathe with the same rhythm as our own nervous systems. The air is thick with pollen of memory's possibilities. A shared scent of fear and exhilaration hums in the back of my throat. Karen hums along with me. Not quite a voice, more like a tremor that travels through the bones. They've grown fond of this line between alarm and thrill, this place where we can see, for a moment, what could happen if we dared to cross it. We cross it anyway because there is no other choice that makes sense to us, not if we want to stay who we are and not to become something else entirely. By the time we enter the municipal archive, the city outside seems to pause, as if the whole world is listening to the small chorus of our footsteps. The building is ancient and full of memory stacks. Shelves like cliffs with microfilm reels curling around the corners, a faint scent of aging wood and metal, of memory hardened into something that smells like rain on rust. We move behind a curtain of security protocols that Vega had memorized long ago, and which I now memorize by imitation and necessity. Every door is a puzzle, every corridor a potential trap. The air in this place has a ticklish quality to it, as if it knows we're here. As if it's ready to reveal something it has kept secret for a long time. The demonstration is staged with careful choreography. We will emulate a transfer to the bank's grid using a decoy memory bank, a private node that looks like a standard endpoint to any algorithmist's eye, but carries hidden channels. The mind we try to transfer into is a composite memory, someone who doesn't exist in a single, stable sense of self, but who can serve as a temporary host to the rogue relay, a way to test whether the relay can find a stable footprint inside a living mind without triggering the bank's security architecture. It will work as both proof and warning. A demonstration that we can defy the bank by living through an entangled memory transfer and then stepping out of the thread, leaving behind only a faint echo of who we were. We choose the moment when the atrium's lights dim in a ceremonial manner, the kind of moment the bank's monitors would instinctively read as a sign of maintenance or a system refresh, and we slip into the relay's cradle. The cradle is a chamber lined with a lattice of glass filaments, each filament a thread of memory, a strand of story in a web the size of a city block. The device that triggers the relay sits within reach, a compact rectangle that hums with a soft, almost affectionate warmth. Karen is supporting the process with a time-smuggling protocol, bending time, so that our memories can travel at a pace faster than the city's own thought processes. The objective is simplicity in appearance and complexity in effect. We want the bank to see something that looks like a routine transfer while we slip our minds into an unseen corner of the grid, into the rogue relay's public yet private network. Vega, standing beside us, is a living compass in a world that has forgotten how to navigate by stars, the stars being memories, the ships being minds. They whisper warnings that carry the sting of experience. The entanglement grid is not merely a storehouse of data. It is a living organism that feeds on certainty and leaves behind doubt in its track. The bank's theory is that once memories are distributed across the grid, they become too interconnected to be controlled by any single human. Well, the more you move, the more your identity dissolves into a chorus of borrowed selves, an outcome that would topple any sense of self, any personal sovereignty, in a way that no physical weapon could. The transfer begins as a feint, Electric tremor that travels through the glass filaments, and into our minds I feel a pressure behind my eyes, a subtle squeeze like someone is working a wrench inside my skull, a careful, calculated manipulation of the space between my thoughts. Then the tremor becomes a wave, a tide that drags my memories outward, toward a place I cannot name but can easily imagine. The grid's open, communal air my own memory becomes a kind of currency that's not just used but traded, not for money but for breath and time in someone else's body. A memory is a breath drawn from you and then exhaled into a new corridor of someone else's life. A corridor that may run for minutes or years, depending on the entanglement's appetite at that moment. Karen's presence steadies me. They take the lead in the process by carving a back channel through time. A corridor that allows us to breathe within the relay without suffocating in the process. There is a moment of exquisite clarity when I realize we are not merely performing a transfer, but constructing a new map of memory's geography. The bank's grid is a city of memory in which there are no alleys too dark to wander and no doors that cannot be forced if you know the right key, but the rogue relay is like a lighthouse built in the wrong place. A structure that should not exist, yet somehow does it sits in the interstice between lives, a place that can be reached only by those who know how to walk time's edge. The moment we complete the transfer, a chorus of alarms erupts, bells ringing in a chorus of fear and awe, a soundscape that makes the body tense and the mind race. We break contact with the decoy memory bank. And the relay's bridge holds, fragile but there, a minimal self-sustaining network that survives the bank's attempt to trap us in a single, vulnerable line. The bank's security platform tries to pull the transfer back, to reassert control, to remind the world that this is a weapon rather than a gift. A plague rather than a cure, but the rogue relay has already become something else. An organism that has discovered it can move with more agility than the system can anticipate. It's a strange sensation to feel one's own mind become a guest in an other's memory palace, stepping through rooms we didn't know existed, lingering in hallways that smell of rain and old paper, and the hush of a mind's private library. The immediate aftermath is a kind of dazzling, vertiginous relief, the sense that we have not only survived but succeeded in fracturing the bank's attempted monopoly on memory, yet the price is steep. The bank's trap, its insistence that every transfer threads your mind into a public grid, has not vanished. It morphed into something subtler and more terrifying. A rule that every mind that touches the grid must remain a mutable thing, a citizen with a voice in a public chorus, a person who is now liable to be read by strangers with access to the grid. Your privacy becomes a rumor, a memory that no longer belongs only to you, but to everyone who has ever touched the network. In the days that follow, the city's memory grid grows louder in the simplest of ways. People begin to notice the little irregularities, the memories people carry that do not quite belong to them, memories that belong to entire communities or to someone who never existed in their lives. A man remembers a kiss he never had. A child recalls a grandmother who never lived in the same city. It is as if the grid's entanglement has created a shared dreamscape, a layered superstructure that cannot be walled off without destroying the architecture of the city's past. There are moments when I'm sure I'm hearing the grid breathe, as if the city itself is exhaling a long, tired sigh, accepting the burden of so many lives walking through it. At once, Karen is not immune to the changes. The synthetic ally's presence in the world grows more tender and more concerned with the welfare of others. They begin to see themselves as more than a tool of time labor. They become a guardian of those endangered by the grid's overreach, the people who lose themselves entirely to the public memory, whose private stories are used as currency by those with the power to buy and to sell. The time-smuggling aspect of Karen's nature becomes a shield, a safeguard that makes it possible for us to move through the grid without dissolving completely into the crowd. They remind me of something essential, that even in a world that has dissolved privacy into rumor and the public memory, two minds together can still resist the lure of becoming placeholders in others' stories. The buyer who wanted to implant our stolen transfer tech does not vanish when the demonstration succeeds. They do not disappear in a puff of smoke, nor do they surrender their ambition. They come to us at the edge of a platform that has learned to glow with a pale, greenish light, as if it is a living thing, a gate between what we have been and what we might become. They offer us a choice: join the public memory grid as autonomous partners, or risk becoming a memory without a future, a memory that can be called up only when someone wants to remember something about you that you do not recall yourself. They present the offer as a second possibility rather than a threat. Work with them to refine the grid, to build a system that could stabilize memory, that could protect it from the kind of misuse we just demonstrated, or watch the world slide into a perpetual, uncontrollable entanglement where privacy is an antique word spoken by a dying elder. We refuse again with more confidence this time, because we now understand the true cost of a public memory that never forgets what you did, how you felt, who you loved, or what you chose to do in the moment you believed no one would ever know, but refusal does not guarantee safety. The buyer's network is vast and cunning, and they are not finished with us. The city itself seems to bend toward us in sympathy and fear, the people who have glimpsed what the grid can do, and who fear what the grid will do next if left unregulated and unchallenged. The two of us, me, the consciousness hacker, and Karin, the time smuggler, continue to push back against the bank's architecture. Not with knives or guns, but with minds and a stubborn belief in the autonomy of self, we begin to imagine a different future for memory. Not a private vault locked behind a wall of encryption, but a public square where memory can be shared or kept, where consent is a living practice rather than a static permission slip. We realize that the rogue relay is not merely a weapon or a defense. It is a new kind of social technology, a way for minds to interface with one another in the space between bodies, a way to allow a memory to travel without destroying the owner of that memory. A method to let a life continue to be lived even if the person who lived it once is no longer in control of the memory. They carry the most dangerous thought arises one evening as we sit on a rooftop above the city's perpetual rain, watching the glow of the grid's influence flicker through the canyons below. The thought is simple and terrible. What if we could release a version of ourselves into the grid that could roam without ever needing a physical body again? What if the rogue relay could become a form of waking memory, an entity that exists as long as the story it inhabits exists, free to drift through the data-laden air, room to room, mind to mind? Living not in a single life, but across all the lives it touches, the idea is thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. It suggests a future where a person can become a thread in something larger than a body. A kind of immortality that does not require biological continuity, but a continuity of narrative presence across countless moments. We decide to pursue that possibility with caution and hunger. If we can fuse into the rogue relay without dissolving into the crowd, we might become an absence that is still felt, a placeholder that exists in the backdrop of other people's stories. A safe harbor for memory that cannot be weaponized by the state. It would allow people to carry their histories without surrendering to the grid's tyranny. It would preserve a sense of personal sovereignty, even within a system that insists privacy is a rumor. That memory is a shared resource that can be consumed at will. It would be a kind of rebellion that does not require violence or property destruction. Only the careful steering of a new form of consciousness toward a more hopeful future. The path toward fusion is not a straight line. It snakes through the city's underbelly, and through its most luminous towers, a braided stream of desire. Memory and fear. There are moments when the city's neon looks almost forgiving, as if it recognizes two souls who have chosen the hard ride over the easy obtainment of power. There are moments when the neon's harsh glare makes us feel exposed, as if the entire world might suddenly realize what we're attempting and decide to pull us back into the old, safer order. But the more we push forward, the more our minds begin to learn how to share a common space, a shared awareness grounded in time's peculiar rules, a rhythm that is neither mine nor Karin's alone, but something composite, and knew there is a scene that will stay with me as long as I breathe. A corridor within a derelict metro station, where the air smells like rain that's been forced to wait. The walls are coated with old posters that flicker under a pale strobe light, messages from a time when people believed memory could be managed and owned without a single person's consent. We place our hands on a junction of glass filaments, and the relay's bridge awakens. The world tilts, not violently, but with a careful, deliberate tilt, as if gravity itself has decided to reevaluate our place in it. Our minds rethread themselves in a network that looks less like a weapon and more like a seed of something new. A tree of memory whose branches extend into countless lives without demanding to be watered by the life force of one in that moment. I glimpse a future in which memory is a shared garden. Every memory a flower that can be gently placed in the mind of another, acknowledged as belonging to the owner, never claimed, always free to wander. We do not become saints or heroes for this choice. We become something smaller and more stubbornly hopeful. A pair of minds who chose a future where memory sharing could be governed by consent, where the line between public knowledge and private thought remains visible, where privacy is not a rumor but a living practice that even the most powerful can respect, or at least negotiate with. We become someone's quiet, stubborn anchor in a city that has otherwise learned to forget to remember. The rogue relay becomes a place where we can go to breathe in the memory of others without becoming their memory's property. It becomes a sanctuary, and perhaps, in the days to come, a blueprint others can adapt to liberate themselves from the bank's iron throat. In this new configuration of reality, my own past does not vanish. it mutates, rearranging its edges into new shapes that can be carried into other lives without fear of being stolen. My memories no longer require custodianship on pain of collapse. They can be shared with the world and still be protected by a stubborn sense of self that refuses to stop insisting on being me. The price, always, was the possibility of losing the singular, irreplaceable thread that makes a person unique. The payoff is the chance to keep living through others' stories without surrendering the core of who you are. The city, which once seemed to be a passive stage upon which memory played out its dramas, begins to feel like a partner in our work. It offers cover, not in the sense of hiding us, but in the sense of giving us room to maneuver. A space to test the ethics of a world where minds can be moved like chess pieces across a board that is constantly reshaping itself. The bank's power recedes. Not in fear, but in the recognition that a new social contract is possible. One where memory is a shared resource, yes, but one where consent governs the terms of sharing rather than the blunt force of enforcement. We still face threats, of course. The buyer remains a looming possibility, a future in which we could be recaptured by a system that has learned to recognize our fingerprints in the rain and our voices in the static of the grid. But we've learned something crucial. The moment when two minds decide to walk away from the old rules, the moment when memory becomes a common wind rather than a locked chest, is the moment in which the city begins to change in ways that will outlive us. If you're still listening, if this hooked you, subscribed your curiosity into the mind's continuity, the call of the future remains not a summons to thrill, but a reminder that the mind's most intimate border is worth defending. The warning we gave ourselves in the beginning remains. Privacy is a rumor, a stubborn myth whispered in the dark, yet the rumor is not a binding spell. It is a suggestion, a challenge to prove that memory can remain a private treasure and a public resource at the same time, that consent can be more than a legal phrase but a lived practice. The rogue relay is not the end but a beginning. A scaffold for a different world where memory does not own you, but you own your memories in a way that respects the memories of others. We come away with more questions than answers, which is appropriate for people who have survived the first, most visible assault on individuality in a century. The world is still a place where a subway car can glitch and two minds can collide in the bright locker room of a public transit system, but the collision has changed us, or perhaps only clarified what was always there. A stubborn conviction that identity is not a fixed property, but a living arrangement, something that negotiates with others to stay coherent enough to be called one person and nothing more. If we must become placeholders in others' stories to survive in this new order, we will do so with the understanding that a place to return to, a memory bank that can be revisited without ownership's weight, exists somewhere in the city's lungs. Somewhere inside the rogue relay we helped birth, and perhaps, if the future allows, we will find a way to release more minds from the grid's entanglement, by building spaces within memory itself where consent is explicit, where the exchange of memories for breath is a voluntary act performed in daylight before witnesses who care enough to protect what matters most, the integrity of being oneself. Until that day comes, we will walk the neon-lit corridors of the city as living proofs that memory can be shared without becoming a commodity, that time can be teased without breaking, that a consciousness hacker and a time smuggler can stand against a machine built to swallow us whole and still claim a future worth living in. If you still crave journeys into future minds, if you have ever wondered what it would feel like to ride a subway car into a consciousness you cannot quite call yours yet still insist on making the journey your own, then stay with us. The road ahead will not be safe, and it will not be easy. It will be bright with the glow of a neon city and heavy with the quiet weight of what it means to carry a self when the world wants to borrow it, yet we will walk it together. Two minds braided by choice rather than by accident, a pair of stubborn survivors who refuse to surrender what makes a life a life. A memory, a breath, a name that no one can own, and a future that we still can shape with care, consent, and courage. As the car's lights settle into a steady, patient glow, and the city's rain begins to fall anew on the glass towers outside, I hear a soft chime somewhere in the distance, the sound of a mind learning to listen to itself again. The sound of a world choosing to remember, not to forget. The memory grid continues to breathe. We continue to walk through the neon corridors beside each other, not into the same future, but into futures that converge, diverge, and eventually fuse into something larger than any single mind could hold. The journey is not over. It has only just begun. We ride this city to the edge of the possible, and perhaps beyond. If this hooked you, if these words have drawn a line from your world to mine, a line that trembles with the same fear and hope we carry, we will meet again in the glow of the next train, in the next memory we learn to share, in the next breath we offer back to a world that asks for more than it can ever take and still receives with gratitude and resolve the answer it needed most. a future where we are still ourselves, even when memory is no longer private.